Welcome to Indispensable, Connection Ministries' video training series for churches and volunteers who are building Christian community with adults with intellectual disabilities.
My name is Jackie Schaefer, and welcome to Connection Ministries' video training series, Indispensable. Throughout this series, Don Bowden and I will present ideas on a variety of topics. Indispensable is a training series that is intended for church leaders and volunteers who are involved in or considering ministries that build Christian community with adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. A vision without a leader to champion is just a dream. In this episode, Don Bowden will urge leaders to pray for a burden to minister with people with intellectual disabilities and a passion to do something about it. Each church needs a leader who will champion the cause even when it's hard. This leader will be the point person that encourages the congregation to embrace a ministry with people with disabilities as a ministry of the church.
In our last episode, we talked about the importance of being in ministry with our friends with disabilities. It's not about bringing the love of Jesus to our friends out of pity, but with a heart to grow closer to Jesus together with our friends who have disabilities. Ministry with is the primary goal of Connection Ministries' mission, a mission that finds its origin in our vision. Our mission is the main thing we do to make our vision a reality. You could say our mission is a roadmap towards a destination or vision. But where does a vision or ministry come from? For me, it started with God plowing my heart and planting a burden for people with intellectual disabilities. These are people who have been excluded from the church. In James chapter 1, it says, if we need wisdom, we should ask God, who gives it generously. And for us, God's wisdom was given generously as we prayed about this burden. As we made friends with people who have disabilities, the burden came quickly, but over several years, God planted in us an expectation for Christian communities that would embrace people with disabilities. He also began to give us a clear direction to make it a reality. It is our hope that our experiences in this training series will be helpful as you follow God's lead. Don Foley has led a ministry in his church for more than 30 years. God used his ministry to plow a burden into his heart and transform his life.
I am called to serve the intellectually disabled adults. Through Matthew 25:45, Jesus tells us, "Truly I tell you, whatever you do for one of the least of these, you do for me." Spirit of Joy is blessed with 15 members and 10 to 12 non-members who are volunteer companions and leaders. These people assist in the selection of study materials. They serve as teachers. They provide transportation when needed. They plan for crafts and snacks, a very important event weekly, by the way. I can have a lousy day. I can come home, but I go to friendship. The fatigue and the frustration simply goes away from the start to the finish of friendship. I know others have said the same. God is so pleased with His church engaging in friendship that He and the Spirit of God are always with us.
All ministries need new leaders who understand the need. But I believe that ministries with people with intellectual disabilities need leaders who not only understand, but are chafed by the burden to do something about this need. These leaders are willing to champion the cause even when it's hard. Joel Barker wrote, "Vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision is just passing time. Vision with action can change the world." The term champion we use in this episode is not a champion of a competition. We use the word champion as an action verb that literally means the acting or taking of responsibility for advancing a vision. But not every leader starts out championing a vision willingly. God in his mercy wanted to save the people of Nineveh. This is in Jonah 1. He called Jonah to go to the great city and preach that they should repent. Jonah not only refused to go, but instead he got on a boat going in the opposite direction. But God pursued Jonah. His ship was caught in a big storm, and Jonah was thrown overboard to save the ship. He was then swallowed by a big fish, and in the belly of a fish, Jonah had plenty of time as well as motivation to pray, and he vows to go to Nineveh. So God commanded the fish to literally vomit Jonah out onto dry land. Now on dry land and probably in need of a bath, God tells Jonah to go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim his message. This time, Jonah obeys God. And his sermon would not have impressed many of us by today's standards, but it was exactly what God told him to say. He simply told them 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. It was through God's power that the Ninevites believed God, and a fast was proclaimed for everyone from the greatest to the least. Now, these were not events of Jonah's choosing. It was God's plan. The people of Nineveh did not repent by Jonah's power, but by God's power. When it comes to advancing a disability ministry in your church, like Jonah, you may feel reluctant, but it may be God's plan that will become reality through God's power. Paul prayed for the church in Ephesus in chapter 3 that they would be rooted in love and having the power to grasp the love of Christ and be filled to the fullness of God. His prayer is that the Ephesians would be filled with God's Spirit. Imagine what can happen when we are filled with the fullness of God, who wants to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine, and not by our power, but by His power that is at work within us. A God-inspired vision to include people with intellectual disabilities in Christian community needs that kind of power. It cries out for a leader or several leaders who will champion the cause. But like Jonah, you may run in another direction instead of championing a ministry. When a newly anointed David arrived at King Saul's camp in 1 Samuel to bring food to his brothers, he heard the Philistine giant Goliath chiding the Israelite army. He could see everyone's fear as Goliath challenged anyone who'd come out and fight him. But he was burdened by the fact that God's honor and the pride of his people was being trampled on. David could have easily left his provisions and returned home. But David said to King Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." David stood up and became a champion for God's honor and the pride of his people. People with disabilities and their families lose heart every day for many reasons. It may be shame, guilt, fear, rejection, and that list goes on. The one place where they should find honor and pride is in God's church. Indiana census tells us that there are 193,000 people with cognitive disabilities out of a population of about 6.7 million people. This is almost 3%. If 100 people worship in your church on a Sunday, would you see 3 of them with intellectual disabilities? For the most part, many churches aren't even aware of this need. These indispensable people, as taken from 1 Corinthians 12, verses 21 through 23, need faith communities that will bring them to Jesus, who will bring them hope. The person who champions their cause may be a pastor, a parent, who has a family member with a disability, or since you're watching this video, maybe it's you. So what should a church's vision for ministry with adults with intellectual disabilities look like? God works through all of us differently. And so there will be differences in the vision God gives us. For Connection Ministries, it began with a burden that resulted in a team of people taking the initial steps. As we began to move forward, a vision and mission began to take shape, and over the years, our vision and mission has continued to mature through God's wisdom and experiences. The vision God gave us finds its mission in the book of Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. It was there that we found the necessary elements for authentic Christian community that we include in our ministries. All believers were together, they had everything in common, and gave to anyone who had need. Every day they met in the temple courts, they broke bread together in their homes, ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. The Lord added to their numbers those who were being saved. We'll talk more about these elements in detail in a later episode. But it was in these verses that God gave us a passion to see churches become authentic Christian communities that reach out and embrace people with intellectual disabilities, their families, and direct support staff, together grow closer to Jesus. Your vision may be based on another passage, but it needs to be founded in His Word, in tune with the burden God places in your heart, and it needs to put a fire in your belly. Be sure your vision and mission are not too broad. It's better to do one thing well than 10 things poorly. If you start a ministry in your church to minister with anyone who has any kind of disabilities, chances are that you will not be effective with any group. Connection Ministries chose to minister with adults with intellectual disabilities because this was the burden God gave us. Far more churches were developing ministries with children than for adults. Adults with intellectual disabilities required specialized curriculum and teaching methods to communicate the good news, and this is where we felt we could make a difference. It will be important not to bypass the steps of discerning your vision or mission. It will keep you on track and provide the means for you to clearly communicate it to others. I want to thank you for joining us for this episode in the Indispensable Video Training Series. It is my hope that you will find these videos helpful and the time you spend a good investment in your ministry. Next to this video on the Connection Ministries website, you'll find a downloadable note sheet that follows this episode. If you have any questions or need information, you can email us at connect@connection-ministries.org or call our office 317-646-5067. Your prayers and financial gifts help Connection Ministries provide valuable resources for churches and families ministering with adults with intellectual disabilities. You can give online at www.connection-ministries.org.